So before we can actually get to finishing out our NPCs and adding quests to our game, there's a change we have to make. You might have seen this in previous videos, but this is the first video I've recorded since I've upgraded to Godot 3.4. So if you're in Godot 3.4, you'll have to make this change if you haven't already. And that is that the name room is now a reserved keyword in GDScript, in the Godot engine. So you can't actually set your own class named room anymore, which is a problem for us because we've done exactly that. And so I've opened my game and you might be panicking seeing that all of our room names and descriptions have disappeared from our editor. But no need to worry here. All we need to do is go into our room script, which I'll do by selecting one of our room scenes and just hitting the script button here. So I'll just come here. And what I'm going to do is you'll see this error, the class name room shadows and native class. What I'm going to do is just update this to be game room. And having done that, you'll see all of a sudden Godot can parse our script again. And if I go back to our game scene, you'll see that all of our values are saved here. You might see some of the lines are cut off, but if you just flip them visible and invisible again, it'll all be fixed. But all that to say, no need to fear, don't need to panic. We just have to change our class name room to be game room, or you can change it to anything else if you'd like that. But it's not enough for us to just change it here because we're referencing room in tons of other places in our project. We're going to actually have to go around and change our room itself so that whenever we reference the class room, it's now game room. So what I'm going to do is first go to our room scene. I'm going to change our scene's name itself to be game room. And I'm just going to make this consistent so that it's game room everywhere in our code now. So now we've got our class name is game room, our actual scene name is game room, and what I'm going to do is update the saved room file. So if I go to our room folder, you'll see we have room.tscene and room.gd here. I'm going to update these two and go through all of our code and update the references to room. I'm going to do this off camera and just fast forward, but just as a heads up, you're going to have to do this on your own as well. Alrighty, so you can see if you look in the file explorer down here that I've changed room to be gameroom.gd and gameroom.tscene. I've changed all of our references to the room class within our code to now also be game room. So the Godot editor should hopefully provide you some guidance in doing this on your own. You might have to reload your project a couple times, whatever. Sometimes things like this can be a little tricky and annoying, but once it's fixed, you'll see that I've got all of the information back here. Godot saved it successfully. I didn't have to re-enter all of our room info, so we are good to go. I've pushed this change as a separate commit, like a between tutorial video commit on the repository if you want to pull this down for yourself. So now that we have that, we are ready to actually finish implementing NPCs. And you'll remember if I go to our item script, the way that we decided how an item would be used is we gave it this use value variable here. And for our NPC, we want to do something similar. You know, remember from last game or last video that we had an initial dialog variable and we also had a post quest dialog variable. Now, it might be true that not all NPCs have a post quest dialog. They might not have a quest, and that's okay. We can just leave it empty. But what we want to do here to allow our NPCs to have a quest, for now, all we're going to do for quests is just make it so that you can give an NPC an item. Later on, you might be able to add other quests in your own game, like making it so that you have to talk to certain NPCs or do whatever. But for our game, just for a simple quest system, we're just going to make it so you give an item to an NPC. And so what we need to do is add a new variable called quest item. So in order to do that, let's add a new line here and we'll say export just like before, but instead of a string, we are going to say resource. And you might be wondering, can't we say item? Because an item is a class name that we've defined. Godot is picking it up right here. But if you try and give it an export hint of item instead of resource, you'll see that it says the export hint isn't a resource type. And this is a current limitation with Godot 3 that I believe is getting fixed, hopefully with Godot 4, is that you can't actually pass in custom resources as an export hint. So unfortunately, we can't limit the player, or the developer really, we can't help ourselves only be able to pick items. Instead, we have to just use the generic resource type as our export hint here. So I'm going to say export resource variable, and this is going to be quest item. Just like that. And now you'll remember if we go to our NPCs in our folder here and I double click on one of our NPC resources like the guard, we'll see that there's now a quest item slot that is empty, but we can drag something in here. And so what we can do now is create a sword item. If you remember from last video, we talked about that we need to get the guard sword. You'll also see that in our dialogue here, which was expertly written by yours truly. What we can do is create a sword item, our new resource, and drag it in here, and that will make it so that is the item our guard needs for their quest item. And again, do you see how we're taking advantage of the editor here? We can make this even better like we talked about last time if you had a JSON or a CSV or some other external database that would be a little bit easier to edit this, but I just want to showcase what you can do with the Godot editor. So let's make our sword item. I'm going to create a new item. I'll right click on our items folder and hit new resource, and I'll type in item. We should see it pop up. I'll hit create, and this will be guard sword. Just to be clear, in case you add a different sword later on. Again, we could probably give better names to all of these, but I'm gonna say guard sword here. Okay, so now if we double click our guard sword, what we can do is actually change our item name, and you'll notice that I called this one guard sword as the resource name down here in our file explorer, but the item name we're gonna give it, which is the thing that the player is actually gonna need to type to pick it up, is just gonna be sword for now. And you can, one way that you might be able to get around this is you could add a display name versus an actual pickup key. That's something that a lot of games will do. So the display name will be guard sword, but the pickup key would be something like sword. And so that lets you have multiple different items that are unique, yet have the same pickup key or something like that. Again, we won't get to that because we're only gonna have one key and one sword in our video, but just to maybe give you an idea of how you can expand this if you're running into that problem in your own game. So anyway, we'll change the name to be sword. Our item name will be sword. And you'll notice and might remember that we only have one item type right now. We only have type key. But what we want to do is create a new type of item, and we'll just call it quest item because this is going to be an item that's meant to be given to an NPC. So if you remember, we store our item types in our types.gd. This is a global auto load, and we can just add another type here. And I'm going to call it quest item. I'm going to do all uppercase letters because this is a value in an enum, so it's a constant value. So we'll have quest item, and now what we can do is if I come over and sometimes, so it should show up right here. It should say quest item as a type, but what I can do is reload my project, and sometimes that will help it if it's not showing up. Okay, so I reloaded my project. You might have to do that same thing in your own game, but I've opened up our guard sword resource again, and then we'll see over in the right that now if I hit the item type, quest item will be available. And so I can actually select that, and now our guard sword is gonna be of type quest item. Now that we've created our guard sword, we can both add it to our game and we can set it to be the quest item that our guard is looking for. So first, let's add it to our game. And I want to do this first because what I also want to do in the same vein as making a specific name for our guard sword, I want to actually also make a specific name for our key so that even though we're only going to have one key in our game, it's at least clear what that key does. So if we add more later, we'll know which resource this is. So what I'm going to do is rename our key here and actually change this to be in kitchen key. And then it's very specific that this is a key, but it's for the in kitchen. And now what we'll have to do to make sure that works is we're not just doing load. I'm in our room manager.gd script here. On line 20, we can't just say key equals load item key. We've got to make it match our file name. And so it's going to be in kitchen key. We'll just make it match exactly what we've just done, what we've renamed it to in our items folder. Okay, so now we have our in kitchen key, a better specific name, even though the pickup for it, the item name is still key. We can do the same for our guard sword. And remember, we were going to put this in the field to the west of town, which we haven't actually accessed yet. But if we go back to our game and look at our kind of basic map here, we'll remember that our field is this thing out to the west of town, so west of the village square. So this is where our field is. Let's go add our sword to our field. And we can do this, let's see, we reference field right here by the village square. So just to keep it consistent, let's in a new line here, do field. And we're gonna do pretty much exactly what we have down here. I'm actually gonna copy lines 22 and 23 where we'll create and add our key. So instead of key, I'll say sword. And we'll do load item, and this will be guard sword. You guessed it. And I'll say sword.useValue. I'll actually comment this line out for now. We'll come back to it. But I am going to say field.add item. which again, remember, is just the function that we added to our room to add an item to it. And I will just add our sword. And so now we've got a sword in the game. It's going to appear in our field and we can go pick it up. It doesn't really do anything yet, but our sword exists and it's in the game. Now we have to actually set our guard to receive it and have different dialogue when the quest to receive or to retrieve the sword is complete. So let's swing over to our guard. So I'll go down to our file explorer and find our guard resource and double click. We'll see our dialogue for the guard again, but now what we can do is drag in our guard sword resource to the quest item. So I'm going to select that in the file explorer and just drag it right in, and we'll see that it now our guard now has a quest item of the guard sword. So the quest item is set. Now we just need to add functionality to actually use that quest item. So in order to do that, let's go to our NPC script, because it's not enough to just have a quest item. We actually need to have a flag to determine whether the person has received that quest item. And I'm just going to add a new variable, and it'll be simply just variable quest item received. And because this is a Boolean, I'm going to give it a default type of Boolean and false here as its value, because no person should receive their quest item by default. I'm actually going to change the name a bit because whenever possible, it's really nice to make Booleans read in a way that is understandable English or understandable whatever language you're writing your code in. So instead of quest item received, we probably want to say something like has received quest item, because then it reads really nicely. Because if we put that in an if statement, it'll be if has received quest item, which is a little bit nicer than if quest item received, etc. So anyway, sometimes it's nice to start Booleans with has or is, or to start it with some word that signifies it's a Boolean. So I'll change this to be has received quest item. Man, received is always hard for me to spell. You always have to I before E except after C and get all those rules right. But there we go. Sure enough. So now we have a flag to determine whether the person has received a quest item. Now we need to actually go to our command processor and work on our give command. So let's head over yonder to our command processor. And as we've done so many times in this series, we will add one more word. And this is just going to be, you guessed it, give. So I'm going to come in and remember this is our process command function. I'm going to add a new word called give, and pretty much the same as all the others, I'm going to return give. This function doesn't exist yet, but we will make it in a second. And make sure to pass in second word, because again, like talk and use, we have to give something. We can't just give. I think I added an extra backslash on the line above. But now we have our give command, and we have a give function that we need to create. So I'll copy that. And give in our order here comes after talk. So I like to keep our function order the same as our match statement order. So if I come down to talk, we will add in one right after this, a new function called function give. And again, remember, we need a second word. This is a string, as it always is. And just like the others, it will also return a string. Now, let's finish implementing this in a second. I'm also realizing that our help command hasn't been updated recently. We added a talk command last video, and we never added it to our help. There might have been others, like use item, that we have not added to. So let's add those. I'm going to say use, and then item, and we'll say talk, and then we'll say NPC, and now we'll say give item. Okay, and now we have a help function that actually lists, helpfully, all the commands that a player can do. This is reminding me, one thing that would be really cool to do is add a third word to our commands. So we could say give item to NPC, so give item character. And that way, if you had multiple NPCs in a room, you could give different items to different NPCs and you'd have to choose. That would make it easier for NPCs to change rooms also, because it wouldn't just be one NPC in a room. Again, we're not going to get there in this tutorial series, but it should be pretty easy to add a third word to your command processor and to make different commands optionally take a third word. So try and do that on your own. That'd be a good experiment to really make sure you understand and build your understanding of Godot, would be to work on adding a third word. If you do need help with that and you're trying that, please join our Discord server. The link to that is in the description of all my videos. We love to help you there. It's a really supportive community. So quick plug for the Discord server, definitely join. But let's get back to implementing give. Okay, this too is also going to follow a similar pattern. So just like our talk function, let me just copy the first 2 lines here because we need to say a similar warning if the player does not type in a second word. So now instead of saying talk to who, we'll say give what. Again, we just want to be clear and really help the player understand, hey, you need to add a second word here. Okay, so now for give, we need to actually find the NPC that wants this item. And again, remember, we're in this tutorial. I'm only going to ever have one NPC in a room, but I'm going to help you, just like our talk command, I'm going to help you write your code here in case you wanted multiple NPCs. So we're going to add a for loop just like we have in talk. So let me just copy that. So for NPCs in current room.npcs, again, this is just looping through all the NPCs in a room. And now what we need to do is check if NPC, and then if we go to NPC quick, we'll remember there's a quest item variable. So we need to check 1, that the NPC has a quest item set, and 2, check to make sure our second word is our quest item. So we can check if NPC.quest item does not equal null, because we want to make sure there's an actual quest item set for our NPC, and then and NPC.quest item, and we need to be able to compare our second word to our quest item here. Well, luckily, we can rely on the fact, or hopefully can rely on the fact, that our quest item is something of type item. And we know that items have item name. And so just like we were comparing items before in our command processor, if we use the use command, for example, we're checking to make sure the second word.toLower equals item name.toLower. So let's actually copy this line right here, line 94 from our use command, because we're going to be doing pretty much the same thing. We need to check if the NPC's quest item's item name matches our second word. So what I'm going to do is actually replace what I just wrote, and we'll say and second word.toLower equals, and instead of item.item name, we want NPC.quest item.item name. So get the NPC, get their quest item, and get that quest item's item name, and then check if its lowercase version matches our second word. So there's a lot going on there, but it should be pretty self-explanatory. We're just trying to make sure that the player typed in the same name as the item that the NPC desires. And remember, because this is an if statement, we have to cap it off with a colon at the end. Okay, so now in this next line is where we're really going to start doing some of the bulk of our work. So if the player has entered an item to give and that item is the NPC's quest item, then we can write NPC, and remember the property we added here is has received quest item. So what we can do is say NPC.has received quest item, and we're just going to set this to be true. More than that though, we don't want to let the player use the same item twice, so we'll also do player.drop item, and then this is going to be second word. All right, so we are giving the NPC the quest item. We don't actually have to give it to their inventory or anything. All we have to do is just mark the quest item received flag as true and drop the item from the player's inventory. One other thing we need to do now is return a message to our player telling them that they've given the item. So we need to not only say what item they've given, but who they've given it to. So we will say return, and I'm just going to mock this out for a second and then we'll fix it later. So we'll say return, the string that we'll show to the player is you give the, and this will be %s because it's going to be a string. So you give the %s, you give the item to the NPC. So you give the %s to, and then I'll say to the right here. Again, you will, as your game develops, you might have to develop your own more complex grammar system. But so we're going to say you give the %s item to the %s guard or NPC. Then I'll add in the % after here to incorporate all of these strings. And we will first say the first one needs to be the item. So we will say second word. And then the second string we need to interpolate in here is the NPC's name. So then I'm going to say NPC.NPC name. And we can confirm that that is the right thing, the right value there by going to NPC, and we'll see NPC name. So what this is going to look like in practice is our game is going to say you give the sword to the guard, which is nice. I think it's exactly what we want. I'm going to add a period right there. And it's going to really inform the player to make sure they know and have some confirmation like, hey, you've given this item away, you no longer have it. Now, this is really good. And this is going to be a good start. We can actually give an item to a NPC now. There's a couple edge cases here though that we're going to have to incorporate and modify our code a little bit. The first thing is that we shouldn't let a player give an item away that they don't actually have. We're not even checking that the item is in the player's inventory, so we need to fix that. The other thing is that right now we're looping through all the NPCs in the room, but we need to have a failure case message saying no NPC in this room wanted that item. So first, let's actually just check the player's inventory and make sure the item is there. We can do this by coming up to our drop command just because we're already doing this. So for item in player inventory, we'll do the same thing, and we need to check that if the second word is an item in the player's inventory. So let me copy lines 76 and 77 here, and we'll come back down to give. And we want to make sure there's an actual second word. So we'll make this if check, making sure that the item is in the inventory will come after our initial second word check, because need to make sure there's a second word before we can check if that second word is in the inventory. So we will say if item in player, or for item in player inventory, so we'll loop through all the items. So the easiest way to do this is let's set a variable, just a local variable here. We'll say variable has item, and this is going to be false. And then we're basically going to say if we find the item, we'll just set has item to be true. And then at the end of our for loop here, we can add another if that says if not has item. So if the player does not have the item, we can return a new message that says you don't have that item. And so what we're going to do is return here so that it breaks it. So if we don't have the item, then we can't carry on with this function, and instead the player is going to have to get that item or try and give an item they do have. Okay, and now we can add the last little check here, which is if there are NPCs in the room but none of them want the specific item, or there just are NPCs in the room, either way. So what we can do is just come to the line after our for loop and just say return, because we know if we get to this point that there's either no NPCs in the room or there are NPCs but none of them want this item, we can just return a message saying nobody here wants that item. And I think that's good enough, even if there are no NPCs. Either way, it tells the player that this is not an item that any of the NPCs in that room want. Okay, so I think our give command is good to go for now. It'll check and make sure that the player types in a second word, that it's a word or an item that the player actually has, and that there's an NPC in the room that actually wants that item. And again, if you want to add that third word to our commands here, so you have to say give sword guard or something like that, what you could do here is add another error message to make sure that the actual NPC the player enters wants that item. So you could have a different error message that says, instead of nobody here wants that item, you could say something like, that's not the item that person wants, etc. So you can, again, if you want to add that third word, which would be a great experiment on your own, that's something you'd have to tweak in here, but it should be pretty easy. Now, we are giving items to an NPC. We're removing it, we're dropping it from the player's inventory, and we're setting the flag on that NPC. The only thing we haven't done yet is actually changed what our NPC says depending on whether this flag is true. And so what I'm going to do is click and copy this has received quest item variable, because we're going to be accessing it in a minute. And I'm going to come up to our talk command. And you'll see previously here that we on line 115 are saying return NPC name plus their initial dialogue. But we don't want to do initial dialogue anymore. We want to conditionally add in either the initial or the post-quest dialogue, depending on whether that NPC has received their quest item. And so what we can do is create a new variable, which I'll just call variable dialogue. And what I'm going to say is npc.postQuest dialogue. And let me make sure I got that name right. Just going to NPC. So it's initial dialogue and then post quest dialogue. So I'm going to say npc.postQuest dialogue if, and then we're going to say npc.has received quest item. So our dialogue is going to be the post quest dialogue if the NPC has received the quest item, else it will just be npc.initial dialogue. And then what I'm going to do is just replace this npc.initial dialogue call on line 116 with dialogue. And so now we've got a dynamic system that's going to interpolate in or concatenate the string with the correct dialogue. If the NPC has received their quest item, it'll be their post-quest dialogue. But if they have not received their quest item or they don't have a quest item, it'll always just be their initial dialogue. Okay, so we have done a ton so far. We've added a give command, we've added quest items. Let's run our game and make sure it works. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to go all the way north to our gate and talk to our guard. So let's go west, go path, and go north. That is how we get to the town gate. We'll see the guards here, and if I say talk guard, we'll see the guard's message, or you can't pass, seem to have lost my sword. So let's go back south, and then I believe the field is to the west of the village. So if I go west, we'll see a field with an item sword. Let's take the sword, and then we'll go back east and go north, so we're at the gate. Now if I say talk guard, it should still be the initial dialogue because we haven't actually given him the sword. So the guard, there it is, it's the initial dialogue. But now if I say give sword, well, let's try misspelling this just to make sure the error message works. It'll say you don't have that item, which is good, that's what we want. But if I type sword correctly, it should say, what it should do is loop through the NPCs in this room, which is only the guard in this case, but it should check and see, is there an NPC who wants a sword? And it should be yes, it should be the guard. So if I hit give sword, we'll see you give the sword to the guard. That's a really nice message that's worded exactly how we want. And it tells the player you've given the sword to the guard. It confirms to them you've lost an item. So now, here's the moment of truth. If I say talk guard, we should see our post-quest dialogue. And we do. You found it. I've never been so happy in my entire life. Please go through into the forest. Uh-oh. There's one thing we still haven't done, and that is unlocked the gate to the forest. So that's another thing we need to do. We've added a quest. Now we need to add some sort of a quest reward system or quest progression system where completing a quest actually makes a change to our game world if we want it to. It doesn't always have to, but we need to add that system. Because now if I try to go north, or I think it might be go forest actually, it should say, oh, okay, well, the gate to our forest isn't locked. We can just win the game, but let's lock that and then make that change. So first, let me go to our room manager, and when we have our gate connect exit unlocked to forest on line 30, I'm just going to change this to be connect exit locked. Let's head back over to our NPC script. Now, you might be starting to wonder, we've got a lot of quest-specific things that are building up in our NPC script, and I think it would definitely be a good refactor to do to make a quest itself either a resource or a scriptable object of some sort, or even a node, whatever you want to do. But I think there's good precedent here to start making quests its own thing, and maybe therefore NPCs can have an array of quests, and you can build up a more complex quest system in your own game. So know that I definitely recommend, if you want to expand on this, making your quest system a bit more robust and not just hard coding it into our NPC. But again, just for the sake of this video and this tutorial, I want to give an example of it. So what we're going to do is add our quest reward to our NPC. And this is going to function very similar to our item, where there's just a use value. And that use value is some generic thing that different types of items will have. I'm kind of envisioning a simple system having a similar thing. So for our NPC, we'll just have a variable quest reward. And this could be anything. It might be an item. So upon completion of the quest, it's an item the player gets. Or it might be an exit. So upon completion of a quest, it is an exit that gets unlocked, which is what we want to have for our game. So I'm just going to say quest reward here, and I'm going to set it to null, just like our item's use value, to ensure that it's got a default value of null. And so what I want to do now is come into our room manager. And I know we've been trying to offload as much as we can to the editor, but unfortunately, just for sake of time, we're going to do our quest reward via code, just like our item's use value. So here we have a guard, right? And we want to set that guard's quest reward to be an exit. So remember, we did this for our keys, where we grab an exit from our connect exit function, and then we set that as our keys use value. We're going to do the exact same thing here. We already have a variable called exit, so I'm just going to use that same one and overwrite it. I'm going to move this line of code to before we declare our guard, just to follow this pattern we have up here. And then I'm going to say guard.quest reward, and you'll remember this is that variable we just added, that property for our quest reward to our NPC. So we'll set the guard's quest reward to be exit. And what this is going to do is it's going to save this specific exit within our guard, within our NPC itself. So now we can look at that quest reward and do something with it. And in order to actually do something with our quest reward, there's two places we could do it. We could either do it in the command processor or the NPC itself. And I mean, eventually, ultimately, if we had our own quest object, that would be the ideal place. But for simplicity, let's just do it in our command processor here, because here we have access to the room, the NPC, and the player. So everything we need is in this one spot. And so what we're doing is we're saying when the player gives the quest item to the NPC, we're saying npc.hasReceived quest item true. What we can also do now is do something if the NPC has a quest reward. So first, let's make sure the NPC does have a quest reward. Theoretically, you might have a quest where there is no reward. So if npc.questReward does not equal null, which means we've set it to something besides the default value, we can then do a series of checks to make sure or to test what type of a quest reward is. Again, for now, the only type of quest reward we're building into this tutorial is to unlock an exit. But in the future, like we said, you might have an item that the player gives or is given to the player. But for now, we'll use duck typing to determine what type of request reward it is, which I'll explain in just a minute. So the code we want to write here is to say var reward, and we're just going to save the npc.questReward so we don't have to type that whole thing out a bunch of times. And then we'll say if is locked in reward, and we'll do pass for now. Okay, so you might not be familiar with this syntax here using the in keyword in Godot, but what in does is it actually checks for a property in an object. And so because an exit is a resource, and resources like everything else in Godot extend from an object, we can use the in keyword to determine if the specified property exists. So we're saying in our reward, is there a property called isLocked? And that will tell us it's an exit without actually forcing it or checking strictly if it's an exit. The reason is maybe we'll have another type of thing in our game that has an isLocked property, and maybe we want to handle it similar to an exit. Maybe it should unlock a chest instead of an exit, for example. We can use this if isLocked to determine, hey, this is something that should be unlocked at some point in the game. And so this is what duck typing is. It's determining the type of an object, not based on what type it actually is, i.e. an exit, but rather determining the type of an object based on what it does. The name comes from the idea that if it talks or looks like a duck, it must be a duck. Well, we don't actually care if it is a duck itself. We care if it talks like a duck. In other words, we don't care if it's an exit itself. We just care if it's unlockable. And you might do this later on by having a unlock function, which is probably a better check here than checking this property. But again, for now, we can use duck typing to say, hey, if this thing is something that should be unlocked, in other words, if it has an isLocked property, then let's unlock it. And so the code that we're going to actually insert into our if statement here is going to look a lot like how we use a key in our use command. So if we go up to our use command and we look at our key section right here, you'll notice that what we do is we say exit.isLocked equals false. I'm actually going to copy this line and use it exactly. And what we can do now is come back to our give, and then within our if statement here, we'll do the exact same thing, except we don't have a variable called exit, right? If we get into this if statement, we know that our reward has a property called isLocked, so we can change exit to be reward here. So I hope all of this makes sense. Maybe you have to go and watch that explanation one more time through. But basically, again, what we're doing here is saying if our reward is something that can be locked, then we're going to unlock it as part of the quest reward. And what we can do here is we could have a bunch of if statements going on and on. If you add more things, you might refactor it to be a match if you had some kind of an enum to match on. But again, just for the sake of our game, we will add an else here so that we can give a note to the developer, to us, like if we've made an incorrect reward or if we've made a type of quest reward we haven't handled yet. So if we want a quest reward as an item, we haven't actually implemented that, so we need to print out an error here to tell the developer like, hey, you are trying to do something you haven't actually finished. So let's just write warning, we'll say warning, tried to have a quest reward type that is not implemented. And this print error is just going to give a message to us in the console as developers saying, hey, by the way, you're trying to do something that's not actually implemented in your code. So let's mark this little section off. And the great thing about this is it's totally optional, because if the NPC doesn't have a quest reward, we just ignore it. The player still loses the item. But if they do have a reward, it'll either unlock the door, or if it's something we haven't implemented, it'll just give a note to the developer. But if this happens, it doesn't break our game. It just means nothing happened. But as a developer, we probably expected something to happen. We just haven't implemented it yet. So now we have implemented the ability for an NPC to actually unlock an exit as a quest reward. And we've set up a framework really nicely if we want to add other types of quest rewards later on. Again, let's go to our room manager and make sure and confirm we've actually added our quest reward for our guard and set it to be the exit. So guard.questReward equals exit, which is great. So now that should be, then in our command processor, when we get the reward from our guard, npc.questReward, we can say reward is locked equals false. The only thing we have left to do now is to test. So if I run our game, first I'm gonna speed through this, go west, go path, go west. I'm just gonna grab the sword, so take sword from the field and go to the guard just to go make this a little bit faster. All right, so we're at the guard. Again, if we talk guard, we need to give him the sword. If we try to go forest, this gate should be locked, right? So the way to the forest is currently locked. But now if I give sword, we'll give it to the guard. If I talk to the guard, it should give us our post-quest dialogue. And most importantly, now if I try to go forest, we should actually go into the forest. And there you go, we have implemented our own basic quest system. We're allowing NPCs to receive items and therefore unlock doors or give another quest reward. I hope this video has been helpful to you and that you've learned a lot. Please comment any questions or issues you're having down below. We would love to have you in our Discord server too. You can get more help there, and it's a great community. The link to that is in the description. If you do find my work helpful, a like and subscribe is always appreciated, and you can actually donate to my channel to help me continue to make great videos on Buy Me a Coffee. The link to that also in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.